Welcome back, and ready to get back into the book of Philippians again today. And I've really been enjoying our journey thus far, and I hope you have been as well. Thanks for tuning in. Before we get started today, I would like to feature a book that I've been reading. It's Anatomy of a Revived Church by Tom Rainer. And I know some of us have gone through Tom Rainer's books before. He has one, Autopsy of a Deceased Church, and now we have an Anatomy of a Revived Church. And if you're looking for reading material during this season, I hope you'll pick up a copy. All right, now let's get into our video.
Philippians 1, 8 through 11. Paul writes, "For God is my witness, how I yearn for you all with the affection of Christ Jesus. And it is my prayer that your love may abound more and more with knowledge and all discernment, so that you may approve what is excellent and be pure and blameless for the day of Christ, filled with the fruit of righteousness that comes through Jesus Christ to the glory and praise of God." Now, here we have a prayer of Paul for the Philippian believers written in this epistle. So let's look at this bit by bit. He says, "For God is my witness." Now, what is God, Paul's witness about? Well, he's just said in the previous section that he thanks God for them and that he holds them in his heart. And he's saying, well, God is my witness. God knows that I have these genuine affections for you. Now, notice he says, "How I yearn for you all with the affection of Christ." Now, that's uh, that's a beautiful thought because Paul is in prison. Remember now he is in prison at Rome, and he can't be with the believers, and he misses them, and he wants to be with them. He wants to enjoy the fellowship of the saints, but he cannot. Now, I think this is especially relevant for us right now because as I'm doing this video, uh, we're in the midst of this coronavirus pandemic, and we're all at home, and we can't even meet on Sundays. And I think with Paul, if we would develop a similar longing for one another and cultivate that, we're doing church online a lot now, but we don't want to get used to that. We want to be back together, and we want to genuinely miss each other as believers. Now, Paul says that he yearns with the affection of Christ. Now, here's a little word study for you that you didn't ask for, but the word affection is the word splanknon. You might say, well, that's a beautiful word. Well, it's a word that it means affections, but it literally means like bowels. I know that doesn't sound very attractive at all, or beautiful or sentimental, but the idea here is in the ancient world they thought of affections, those sort of deep emotions, as being deep in your gut and deep in your inner being. So you'll see that language in the Old Testament and the New. David says that the Lord tries, and I'm quoting King James here, tries the reins in the heart, where reins means kidneys. So the idea that God is judging the inward part of us. So this means a deep longing, a deep affection down inside of us. So this is a powerful word. And he says, "It is my prayer." Now let's clue in right there really quick because Paul says, "This is my prayer." And here is Paul's prayer. Let's see what he prays for the Philippian believers. He prays, and this is his request. Paul's request is that their love may abound more and more. Paul prays for their love to abound. Now, that's just a beautiful prayer. And we should pray that for one another, that our love would grow, our love for Jesus and our love for one another. But this love is not to grow just by itself, but it is to increase also with knowledge and discernment. Sometimes you hear people pitting love against, say, knowledge or discernment, or people will say, well, it's not very loving to be critical or anything like that. But the fact of the matter is, love is not incompatible with knowledge and discernment, but they go hand in hand. So we don't want to say, hey, we don't need to know all this doctrine and things. We just need to love one another. And discernment implies being able to discern between what is right and what is wrong. Being able to look at an action and say that's sinful. Being able to look at a teaching and say, no, that's incorrect. And that's actually an expression of love. Now that's the request. Now what's the purpose for the request? The purpose is so that, that's a purpose statement, so that they may approve what is excellent and be pure and blameless for the day of Christ. So Paul wants them to be able to recognize the higher things, the excellent things, and to be pure and blameless. So he wants them to be inwardly pure and blameless to those looking on, and be and to be that way for the day of Christ. Now we've seen that phrase day of Christ already in the previous section. God's going to complete his work in us till the day of Jesus. And he says, be filled with the fruit of righteousness. Now that calls to mind Galatians 5:22-23, the fruit of the Spirit. And this previous section, I should note, reminds us of Romans 12:2, that we may prove what is the good and acceptable and perfect will of God. But anyway, the fruit of righteousness. So believers are to bear Christian fruit. And this fruit doesn't come from ourselves, but it comes through Jesus Christ. Now we're going to be ready for the day of Jesus Christ by bearing fruit through Jesus Christ. Now that we've looked at the request, we've looked at the purpose. Now let's look at the final result, or the goal. It's for the glory of God. Everything in our lives, everything that God is doing in us, is ultimately for his glory.